Welcome to the Guns and Yoga podcast. My name is Wendy Hummell, and today I have a very exciting announcement. As you can see, we are on video, but if you're not watching and you're listening, you can hop on over to our new YouTube channel, Guns and Yoga, and you can please subscribe and watch the show there. Today, I have a really great conversation with Kyle Stubbs. Kyle is a police officer in British Columbia in Canada and has experience as a paramedic, and he's also a husband and a father. Kyle and I discussed the work that he's doing outside his full-time job as a first responder coach. Kyle shares how his own experience in a men's group coaching program inspired him to create the 9-8 Program, which is a 10-week group coaching program that came from the 10 Code for Backup. It's based on the premise of connection, mindset, wellness practices, and addresses the masculine archetype, something that we don't really hear too much about in our profession. We discuss the importance of male friendships, masculine and feminine traits, and how a balance of these traits can benefit everyone regardless of your gender. I know that framing these characteristics such as discipline, focus, and confidence as masculine and being more vulnerable, compassionate, and supportive traits as more feminine can be a new concept for many people, but I think it's an important topic to address because, as Kyle and I discussed, the assignment of certain traits as mutually exclusive for a particular gender isn't really serving anyone very well. Kyle walks us through the soft talk challenge. It's something that focuses on paying attention to the words that we use, both internally and externally, and it really does matter and has a profound impact on our mindset, behaviors, and actions. Kyle and I also discussed the difference between coaching and therapy. And I think this is an important topic to cover because coaching as an industry is really becoming more mainstream and it's becoming more prevalent in the first responder world. Coaches can help when clinical level care isn't required. Coaching isn't intended as mental health care. And I'll say that again, coaching is not mental health care and serves to support clients through concrete changes, focusing on achieving goals and as more of a collaborative relationship. Professional coaches do a whole lot of asking questions while helping you to design your future and are very discerning listeners. With that being said, therapy can look different depending on the therapist, their modality, and the client's needs. So not to complicate things even further, but there's also consulting and mentoring to add to the mix. Consultants get paid to provide quantitative analysis, roadmaps for organizational change, and they get paid to provide answers. Mentors are typically experts or veterans in the field that help those with less experience successfully reach their goals. So coaching within the first responder realm is really no different than anywhere else. If you're selecting a coach, you must do your due diligence before you or your agency hires anyone. So here are some things to consider. 1, what's the person's background? What certifications do they have? Coaching is an unregulated industry, which means that someone may or may not be certified. And if they are certified, you may want to know where they trained. It comes down to what's important to you. Some certifications can be a dime a dozen. So take time to really think about this. Ask for referrals or testimonials. Number 2, what type of coach are you looking for? A transition coach, someone who helps navigate life challenges like divorce or retirement or really any big life change? Are you looking for a health coach, a financial coach, a meditation coach, a life coach, leadership coach, or a relationship coach? Number 3, do you want one-on-one coaching? Do you want group coaching? A combination of both? I've been on both the receiving and the giving end of both of these types of coaching, and they're both beneficial. The transformative power of the group is really hard to put into words, but having someone dedicated to helping you specifically navigate your goals, your future, they're listening and asking questions and offering insight can be pretty amazing too. So number 4, do you want to do it online? Do you want to do it in person? Number 5, how much does it cost? And number 6, how long does the program last? Is it a few sessions? Do you meet weekly, monthly? How long are the sessions? So if you're interested in learning more about Kyle's specific coaching services, check out his website, which I've included in the show notes, and see if this is something that may benefit you. And one more thing before we head on to the conversation with Kyle. I've been getting a lot of messages and texts and emails from all of you, which is wonderful. I love to hear from you all. And I want to encourage you to please keep reaching out. And again, you can also now do that on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you think about the video edition. But I also want you to share, like, subscribe. Please give us a review if you find any of this content valuable. And again, remember that this podcast is really a true labor of love, and I really want to expand our reach. So if you could help in doing that, if you find any value in any of these episodes, we would greatly appreciate it. So thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. So today I'm going to talk to Kyle Stubbs, and full disclosure, this is the actual second interview that I've done with Kyle. We did one a couple months back, and we had some sound issues on our end. So thank you, Kyle, for returning to the Guns and Yoga podcast.
You're welcome. The first conversation was so good, I had to come back for another.
There you go. Right. We'll stick with that. Well, and another change too that I just sprung on you, and I apologize, is that we just switched not that long ago. So not only is this now available in audio, but we're also doing video. But you look great, so it's all good.
I was prepared for either way. It's all good, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Kyle, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have you kind of start out and let everyone know a little bit about your background, because you are not in the United States. So I want everyone to know geographically, first of all, where you're at, a little bit about your background as a first responder, and then we'll just kind of take it from there.
Thanks. I'm up in British Columbia, Canada, about 9 hours north of Vancouver, so a little ways up there. And I'm currently a general duty police officer with the RCMP, our federal police force. And prior to that, I was a paramedic and a volunteer firefighter. And currently, I'm still working as a general duty police officer, but also as a coach for first responders and dad, husband, otherwise happy guy.
Good. I'm glad you added that in at the end.
It takes top rank, 100%.
Yeah, good answer.
And that's something that I've noticed in your podcast recently and other first responder podcasts, that's becoming the norm now, where we're starting to identify as the people we actually are versus our career choice, which is, I think, the first major step in shifting how we go about being healthy first responders.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation, because identity is, which I know you and I have talked about it before, is something that we're just so closely tied and associated with in our line of work.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm in that boat 100%. There was a long time in my career, as no matter what first responder role I've been in, where that was how I would introduce myself, would be, I'm Kyle, I'm a cop, or I work with police dogs, or I'm a paramedic, something like that, right? And it doesn't actually have anything to do with who you are. You don't say, I'm Kyle, I love hunting, I love fishing, I love skiing, I love all these outdoor things with my kids. And instead of introducing yourself like that, you just put a hard stop on it, that I'm a first responder. That's it.
Yeah. And let me ask you, and you may have said it, how long, for those listening, have you been a first responder?
It's a good question. I guess it would be about 14 years now altogether, 8 years as a police officer, and then paramedic and fire before that.
And so what led you to your career as a first responder? Is it something you knew you wanted to do, or can you share a little bit about what led you to the profession?
Yeah, I love hearing people answer this question when you ask them. It's always interesting to hear the different backgrounds of it. For myself, I remember when I was a kid, we had a yellow lab, and I would pretend I'd go on runs. I was a ski racer growing up, so I was very into skiing, and I'd go on runs with this dog when I was only like 13, and I would pretend that dog was a police dog, and I'd be chasing people on these trail runs and stuff, and looking back on it, it was probably the most hilarious thing you've ever seen, this chasing an imaginary criminal through the bush with my dog. But I loved it, and I had no intention of ever becoming a police officer, but I remember that very clearly, and that happening on a regular basis. And I continued to ski race for a while. I got an injury that was quite severe. I broke a couple of vertebrae in my back and retired from that and started to coach. And I realized that even while I was ski racing, I always enjoyed or I had this thought in my head that I enjoyed the coaching side more, the helping people more. And that kind of parlayed into me coaching, and then realizing that I really dig this helping people thing. And then I joined as a paramedic because I couldn't become a police officer yet because I was rehabbing my back. So that took about 2 or 3 years to fully rehab my back, and then started the process while I was a paramedic and a firefighter of going through the application process to become a police officer.
So when you were, I love that you just shared how you're imagining being a police officer with your dog when you were a kid. Because I think that stuff is so important. Like, we forget about those things in our childhood that led us to where we're the place that we're at today. So thanks for telling us that. So about how old were you when, if you can remember, when all of that started to surface for you?
Oh, I was young. I was 13, 14, maybe. Yeah. And it was, like I said, I had no intention of becoming a police officer at that time. And even when I was a paramedic, I was still hesitant to become a cop because, in all honesty, I wasn't sure if I could turn on that authoritative switch very easily. And that paramedic route felt really, really simple that way. Like, I could just help. I didn't have to change people's directions or anything like that. And it wasn't until my wife, we were having a conversation one day, and I reminded her of that story with the dog, and she was like, "Why don't you do it? Go do it." Well, I can't do that. And then you think about it for a couple of minutes, like, I can do that. Let's go. And
I love that your wife inspired you to switch and go for what you wanted to do.
Yeah. She's been a catalyst for a lot of change in my life, that's for sure. And that's how I kind of dove into the work that I'm doing now with coaching first responders, is from a point in our relationship where my wife just flat out called me out one day. We were coming home from a date, and it was one of those really empty, just heavy feeling kind of dates that you go on as a married couple. And when we got to the driveway, I parked the car, and she didn't get out right away. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. What's going on? And she called me out and said that she didn't know if I was happy or sad or mad, frustrated, any of those things. I was just always the same. And I was like, no, what are you talking about? That's silly. That's like my strength. And I've been a first responder for 10 years or so at this point. And I was like, that's my strength as a first responder, is my ability to be flat, to not respond to things. What are you talking about? And then it started to click for me. She got out, and I sat in the empty car and realized how big of a comment that was and how much there was there. And that took me down a path of trying everything to try and figure out, okay, why am I like this now? Why am I relatively flat all the time? Why am I a little bit snappy when I didn't used to be? Or why do I have trouble connecting or being remotely vulnerable with the person that I love the most? And going down that path, that led me to all kinds of things. Led me to trying to meditate, which was horrendous, as most people first experience when they're really mad at whoever was talking. And I just shut it off, and I just gave up on it. I tried journaling, which would just be me writing about what a good first responder I was when I look back at them now, and what a good athlete I was, but what a horrible parent, what a horrible husband, and I really wasn't. But that when that inner voice takes over and you start writing down a rabbit hole of things, that stays in that track, right? So tried that didn't work. And then I found a group it was a 10-week online men's course or men's program. And it was really interesting. It was way out of my comfort zone. But the biggest thing about it was that it was a big stretch for me just to sign up for this. and it covered all kinds of things. But when I signed up for it, I realized that there was a dozen other guys on this course, and they all had the same, they weren't first responders, but they had the same problems that I had. Meanwhile, I thought that I was all alone in this whole I'm numb, I'm shut off, and my wife's complaining about it thing, when that's not the case. Or that I was alone and that I get snappy with my kid. That's not the case. There's all these other people out here that have the exact same problems. Their lives look very different than mine, but their problems are very similar. And going through that program was the change in my life that I needed. And that's what I've based off of what I'm now offering.
So, and before we talk about that, because we're definitely talking about that, I want to stop and just kind of remind everyone that's listening, because I know you and I have talked about this before, since we've talked not just once on the first time we tried to do this, but just in other conversations we've had, is why that is. And if you can just stop and explain to anyone that's listening about what compartmentalization is and why that might surface as a first responder, and how it makes sense that if you're shutting off and numbing out certain emotions and things, how that translates into your relationships.
Yeah, and I'll speak to this from a male specific standpoint, especially where it's ingrained in us from when we're kids to be the person that fixes things, and that's like our key role subconsciously in ourselves, that we can fix whatever. If something breaks in the house, we can fix it. If something breaks in our relationship, we can fix it. If something breaks in us, we can fix it. And it's a very solo mindset to have. And we get it a little bit stuck in the popular marketing or culture right now for the last 10, 15 years of that lone wolf mentality is the mentality that you want. That you want to be that badass that's able to do anything and take on whatever. And that's true, you can take on whatever. But when you actually look at what I painted as clearly as possible, what a lone wolf is, there's no like super healthy lone wolves walking around in the forest. There's only two reasons why a wolf becomes a lone wolf in the real world, and that's because they've either been kicked out and they're sick and they're not going to make it, or they're making an effort to start their own pack, their own group. And that's the trouble with that whole lone wolf mentality, is that we're not designed to be lone wolves. We're not. We're a culture that belongs in a pack and belongs in the tribe, right? That's why we see so much in first responder military backgrounds. When you leave that tribe, there's a whole lot of isolation that comes with it. And that's kind of where we need to kickstart that. Okay, I need more support. I don't need to do this alone.
Yeah, and I think that you hear people talking about this more and more, I think, and it could just be that maybe this is something that I'm paying more attention to, and it's what I know to be true. But I can say, as somebody who's been around this profession for 25 plus years, that this is absolutely the opposite messaging that we were given. Actually, kind of conflicting messaging when you think about it. You come in and you're told this is a family, and we watch each other's back. But at the same time, we have to suck it up and keep these things to ourselves, like you were just saying, that lone wolf mentality. So I think it can get kind of confusing, but it just goes against everything in our innate makeup of what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to be healthy, functioning members of society. And so when you do that for so long, especially as a first responder, and then you try to go home, like you were explaining with your wife, it's hard. You can't just turn it on and off. It's not like an on and off switch, right?
Yeah, totally. And I actually had just watched this morning, so it's fresh in my head. But anybody listening, I won't tell you to pause it, but watch this after, or pause it and watch it right now. But SNL did The Man Park. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it, but I love SNL, so maybe I'll have to watch it. I'll have to put the link in the show notes.
It perfectly characterizes a lot of this stuck spot that men find themselves in when their partner comes home and they just unload on their partner because their partner's the only person they have in their life that they can unload to. And that's not fair. Like it's not what your partner signed up for. And this skit does like a fantastic job of painting that picture. And like these, I won't spoil it, but wives take their husbands to a man park, like a dog park, for their husbands to socialize. And it's so good.
Oh, good. But okay. Yeah, I'll have to watch that.
It paints a shockingly accurate picture of what it's like for the vast majority of men out there. And a lot of people will say that they have this really great group of friends, or the crew that you work with is really great. And yeah, no doubt they are great. But there's statistics to back this up, that there is a huge problem with men, especially, again, being isolated, whether they want to admit it or not. And there's studies out there, like the average male under 40 in North America has 2 legitimate friends. And over 40, that number goes down to 0. And like when you really wrap your mind around that, that's shocking. And you picture of what it looks like for somebody that's really struggling, and they have 0 legitimate people that they can connect with aside from maybe their partner. That's a scary spot to be in.
You know, I'm so glad we're talking about this, because so much of what I've paid attention to recently when it comes to this stuff is more from a feminine or female perspective, right? And how we're socialized, and things that specifically have to do with my experience, obviously. And I think that I've really started to expand like my awareness on this topic, because I've now really see that, yeah, this is a tough profession. This is a tough world for women, but I think it's equally as tough for guys, for the reasons that you just said, is that, there's more men in law enforcement than women, but there's equal amount of pressure for very different reasons. So that's why I think it's great that you're talking about this, you're educating it, and you're creating a platform and an opportunity for men to talk about this openly.
Yeah. And it's easy to get it twisted, especially if this is something that's totally new. The self-development, quote unquote, is new for you, that you think that what I'm talking about here is like, oh yeah, you can go and cry on this guy's shoulder kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about. That might happen, but that's not exactly what it is, right? It's actually being able to have a group of guys that call you out on your bullshit when you're being an asshole to your family, or when your job is taking precedent over the more important things in your life. And to be able to, if you're legitimately struggling with something, to be able to actually call up your buddy and be like, hey man, you want to grab a coffee or go for a walk? And we can actually talk about something, instead of just talking about how bad the Seahawks were or whatever it is.
Yeah. And these are things that we weren't taught. Like, I didn't learn this stuff in school. I didn't learn this stuff in the academy. I don't know about you. So it's kind of interesting how all of these things that are so important for our survival, really, like not just as first responders, but as human beings. I'm really glad that people like you are bringing this kind of education and opportunity to people that, especially to first responders. So maybe you could start to tell people a little bit about how you came up with this whole concept of creating your own group. I know you said it was a result of your own work, and kind of what that looks like.
Yeah. So we talked about my backstory a little bit there, and the real light bulb moment for me on when I discovered how important this would be is after this kind of call out by my wife that I spoke about, a year or two later, our youngest daughter was born, and she was born super premature. She was born at 32 weeks. She could fit in your hand, tiny. And she ended up spending about 4.5 months in the hospital. And they found a large mass in her spine that they had to take out. And they gave us the whole story about how Matilda might not make it, be prepared for that, and they painted the worst possible scenario for us. So we lived in the hospital on rotating shifts throughout that. I would do 12 hours, and Chelsea would do 12 hours with our oldest daughter at home, and we'd switch. And during that time, I had this network of men that I had gone through this program with to lean on and to talk about how legitimately difficult this was on so many different levels. And I thrived through that time in the hospital. A part of me, as odd as it sounds, kind of enjoyed it. I had a police dog that I was training in the parking lot while I was at the hospital, and I wasn't working, but I was doing really well because I had that network to talk to. So I was checking in with these guys like once every couple days, sometimes more than that. And it dawned on me that, okay, this is not that different than if I was off work for a stress-related injury or a physical injury. And then I thought about how that person that's off on work doesn't have that support network. They've got the crew at work that they're a little bit nervous about what they're thinking about, why they're off work. You start telling yourself a story that, oh, the crew thinks I'm milking this, or that I'm weak, or whatever it is. And you have your force-appointed psychology appointment that you should go to. And it's really setting yourself up for digging yourself into a deeper and deeper hole versus digging yourself out of wherever you've gotten to. So that kind of switched on for me about, oh, wow, this would be fantastic. And I looked around, I couldn't find anything that was out there in that realm. So I took essentially as much training as I could find on how to run that program and how to make it for first responders. So I did a mentorship with the man that ran that program, helped with some online courses with him. And then I started to craft this program that I call the 9-8 based off of that, with a focus specifically to first responders.
You know, you make me think about I mean, you and I've talked about this before, but you make me think about my own experience with, well, actually 2 daughters in the NICU. And I had the complete opposite experience that you just described, because back then I didn't have any of this that I have now, meaning the education, the support, and just really the know-how to know that you don't want to push through these kinds of things by yourself. Yeah, I had a couple of friends, but I was still of that mindset when I went through that difficult time after having premature babies. And then probably on top of that, I'm the one who had them. So there's hormonal issues at play as well. It was really difficult, and still trying to maintain semblance of, normalcy with my husband, and then working and feeling bad about not being at work. And then when it happened the second time, I had a young daughter at home because my girls were born 10 weeks early. And so they each spent time in the NICU for, depending on which one, 55, 38 days. But what I really like, and the point I want to drive home for what you said, is you had these tools and that support in place. And it was like that preventative, proactive peer support kind of mindset that got you through, which is something that I'm such a strong believer in now, having done this work and having managed and running a peer support team and running some coaching groups myself. I don't know that you can say it enough, the value in allowing yourself to be a little vulnerable and being in some sort of a group like this, because like you said, we may not all have the same situations, but the experience is the same. The emotions are the same. And we're so much better in getting through this when we have the support of others.
Yeah. And the support of others and that full toolbox of, okay, I'm buried in my phone and I can't put it down. What do I do? That, like, having that toolbox behind you and support behind it is pretty amazing. Take out the pretty, it is very amazing.
It really is. And it's like, it's something that, I look back, I'll be honest, like, I'm like, man, I really wish I would have learned this stuff 20 years ago. And that's what's so passionate, like why I'm so passionate about teaching these younger officers or any first responders these tools so that they have them. And And now I want you to kind of tell people, so you laid the groundwork a little bit. If you could continue and really give us, well, as much as you're willing to share about the nuts and bolts of your program, because I think it's so unique and such a great program for anybody who's listening that might be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So the program is based off of, it started out as an 8-week program, and the feedback from the first 3 rounds of it were all that it should be longer. So it's 10 weeks now, and it starts off with everything. We have a different module for every chapter or every week, and we do weekly calls on Zoom, and then a check-in call in between those weekly calls. And each week is a different module. So we start with just a foundation, where we talk about how do you lay the foundation for a healthy day, a healthy life, and things that we just unfortunately don't know. How much water are you supposed to drink in a day?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, 1 cup? No, maybe it should be a little bit more. Right? And start off on the really simple things. Breathing is an overarching skill, because that's what it is, something we take for granted. That starts off just learning where we're breathing, how we should be breathing, or how we can be breathing, and the effects that it has on us. And it goes from there all the way into relationship, how to listen, some of those skills that we definitely haven't learned before, and how that one, the big one that comes up in that every time, is how do you walk in the door from a shift?
Yeah.
When you don't want to get into the family flow. So picking up some skills on how to do that. And then we go into everything from vitality, how we can start to limit dependency on coffee and energy drinks for a lift. And it goes into everything from relationship, vitality, mindset, awareness. We cover the whole gamut. So by the end of that 10 weeks, you've got a full toolkit on how to deal with essentially anything that you're going to come up against. But throughout that, in kind of a sneaky way, you've also built this kick-ass group of friends that you didn't have, and guys that you can lean on for anything. And I say guys, but women have taken the program, and women are definitely welcome to take it. But so far, it's been mostly men.
And do you, and I know we talked about this, but I can't remember your answer. Do you mix men and women in your groups?
Yeah, ideally, I like to keep it as either all men or all women. For a specific reason, if we're going to take it as deep and as woo-woo of a word as it is, transformational, mixing genders like that quite often limits our ability to open up. It doesn't matter how much we want to say that we're not affected by the opposite sex in the same room as us. We are. We're not gonna go to that place that we might go to if they're not there. And that doesn't have to be something crazy. It doesn't have to be something sexual, but it's hardwired in us to connect with our own gender on that deep level a lot easier than if we're mixed.
And I understand what you're saying, because, I run a group and it's all women. And I started out by saying it can be anybody. And I'm crafting different things for future offerings. But I see what you're saying, because, yeah, we're, especially in the first responder world, we have a lot of things that are in common, but we are uniquely different as men and women. It's not to separate us, but it's just to provide a little bit more of a container of safety for people to feel like they can share a little bit more. So I get it.
Yeah. And quite often, if I've been challenged on that, on why it's men specific or why we want to keep it as one, you can kind of say that it's exclusive to be inclusive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind sharing a little bit, so you said you expanded it now. It started out as 8 weeks. It's now 10. As you go through these modules, one thing that I found to be a little bit unique and, of course, very interesting is you do really get into masculinity and archetypes. And I am going to go ahead and assume that most people listening don't really know what that means. So again, we don't want you to give all your secrets away. We want people to sign up for the program. But if you could just explain a little bit about what that is and why you integrated that into your program.
Yeah, and that was a big one for me when I first dove into, like I mentioned before, the self-development world.
Mm-hmm.
was learning, okay, the male archetype there is that we have kind of ingrained is to fix things and to be that guy that just can fix things. And he's this, think of like the badass barbarian picture, right? The one that he can take on the world. And that's a huge part of being a man. Yeah. So there's the warrior archetype there of being able to take care of shit when we have to. And then there's also a few other things mixed in that we often take for granted. So the magician would be another one where we can start to, the way that I like to think about that is that I can change things around me by my words and how I influence them, and embracing that side of being a man. So think of that as like a leadership role where you're leading by example and you're actually changing people's behavior by how you are. You can look at another one of these, go very, very deep, but to explain them briefly, another, probably the biggest one that we ignore as men is the lover. So the soft side of us, our ability to embrace a little bit of that feminine energy and be able to be soft and connect with our kids and our partners. So instead of being hardened all the time, but to be able to actually open up and embrace that. And another one being the king. So the king being that leading example, right? Stern but fair, things like that, and embracing that side of it. So they all kind of collectively, they all can build into what I would consider to be a healthy version of the masculine, as much of a trigger word as that is for a lot of people.
Well, and one thing that, I really enjoy learning about different concepts through different frameworks. And that one has just really always been really interesting to me, the hero's journey, and of course the heroine's journey with these different archetypes. And one thing I want to make sure people understand, because you said the word masculine, feminine might be triggering for people, is that when we say that, and I haven't really been able to figure out a better way to explain it. So if anybody listening, or if you, Kyle, have an idea, but masculine doesn't mean you have to be a guy to have those traits. Like, I know that I've got several masculine traits. In fact, probably a lot of women who get into this line of work have a lot of those masculine traits, which is what makes them want to do this kind of work. In fact, and this is like a topic for another day, I think sometimes women can overcompensate and get rid of and almost stuff away some of those more feminine traits at the expense of the type of work we do. And vice versa. Like, I've met a lot of guys in my career who have those more feminine traits, collaborative, caring, more really good in communication. So I just want to make sure people listening don't think you have to be a guy to have these masculine traits. You have to be a girl to have these feminine traits.
No, and that's a lot of times that feeds back into what we're talking about, where if I'm a man and I don't embrace any of the feminine qualities, I'm going to have a very lonely partner, or I'm going to have some very isolated kids that I'm not able to connect with. And we see that all the time by not being able to mix that. Now, you can go too far. Absolutely. Your partner doesn't want somebody that's nonstop emotional mess and crying all the time. But it's being able to play that balance and find the healthiest version of it. That's so important, that we often neglect in exchange for that badass warrior type of a image, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that is one of the things that I personally have seen when just doing peer support at work. And I didn't really put this together at first, but peer support is, if you're going to label it, has a lot of feminine traits that in our line of work we don't normally embrace. And what's so cool, and I know you've got you probably see this all the time in your group, is that I have seen men and women, the powerful transformation. You use that word first, but that's really what it is, to see people in this environment share and be vulnerable, how powerful it is. And in my opinion, I'm not saying people can't make progress by themselves, because they absolutely can. But I see that people working together in these groups, it seems like they go further faster. And I don't know what your take is on that.
Yeah. Well, there's a multitude of parts to that, but a lot of it is that you're being inspired by the other person, that other person that you see a lot of your own traits in that, or your own struggle in that, and you see them kicking ass and working through it. So it's going to push you into that same mode. Or it's the ability to actually see how other people are handling things, or how other people are faced with struggles that you find really easy, and your ability to mix and match and be able to help that person puts you in a place of empowerment, so to speak, where you're gaining momentum by helping that other person. So it's all that, the connection, that group aspect of it is huge. And you're right, you can succeed, you can thrive on your own, but it's hard, and there's going to be spots that you can't fill. Just how it is.
So continuing on with your kind of, if you don't mind getting a little bit more into the program, you've got these different modules, you have these group calls, and how many people usually go through this together? I'm assuming everybody starts and finishes together. Then is there any kind of continuation? Like, what happens after your time is up? Because my guess is, if it's anything like what I think it is, people don't want to just say goodbye and that's it. They want to stay connected.
Yeah. So originally I had designed it as, my program's called the 9-8 program, and 9-8 came from, it's our 10 code for backup. And it was the idea off of that you can be your own backup, and you can also have this other group too as your backup.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And it started as with the OCD and me wanting it to be 9 guys for 8 weeks. And now that's transformed into something bigger. So usually around anywhere from 6 to 12 is a great number. If it gets too big, it starts to, I can call a few people out. It gives you an opportunity to hide in that group instead of showing up fully. And then after that, the 10 weeks is over, we'll do monthly, or once every 2 months, we'll have a call where we're just connected and just checking in, seeing how everybody's doing. And it can be based off of anything from just a simple check-in to, hey, let's talk about our breathing. Let's talk about our language. Talk about whatever's hot, right?
And I know I don't expect you to obviously tell us names or give any like personal details, but can you relay maybe some of the success stories that you've experienced with people in your group since you started doing this?
Yeah. So there's no like prerequisite for entry into this. It can be as baseline, no prior experience with self-development, to a fully functioning yogi, to somebody that's off on stress leave and in a really hard spot. So everybody kind of comes in that same place. And the feedback right away was that this is exactly what I needed. It's hard to beat that for feedback, because it's filling such an obvious hole.
Yeah.
But success stories are like this. It's amazing how quickly doing the work on yourself can transform your life in so many ways. Whether that's people signing up for the program and then getting back to work again, which is amazing, and being able to comment throughout that process of being like, yeah, this is helping. That forced psychology appointment that I don't want to go to, that's only once every couple of months, where I don't do any work in between there, that's not helping. It's the connection and the filling up with the toolbox that's helping. One of my favorite ones, and this was actually feedback that was given to me when I went through my program, when I was in that rough spot, was that I had a friend call me out that I had a resting bitch face. That was gone now.
Uh-huh.
And I actually,
well, now hold on a minute. I want to ask you about this because I talked to a lot of people who say they have that, right?
yeah,
How did that stop? Was it a conscious thing, or is it just something that happened as a result of doing all of this?
it's not a conscious thing. It's definitely
Okay.
not a conscious.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna walk around all smug and stern looking and pissy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a subconscious thing that legitimately shifts when you change the language that you're telling yourself in your head from this work that you're putting in to one that goes from super negative and beating yourself up and beating other people up to one that is uplifting and motivating. Your facial expression is going to change. And there's a multitude of men that I'm very, very good friends with that I've worked with through this and that have taken my program or other programs where I've seen that shift. And it's funny that you brought that up because that's the one that comes to mind the fastest. Is
that something we can help advertise for your program? Is get rid of resting bitch face?
Yeah, just kidding. Exactly. The super smug looking guy on one side and then a smiling guy on the other.
Yeah, that's funny. No, it's just you said that and it made me, I've had a lot of people say that to me about themselves, like how, well, people just say I look like this and it's funny because you've just kind of explained why that is, because so much of our behavior is driven by our subconscious and we're not even aware of why we come across or what we do and where it comes from. And that whole idea of just doing the work and then seeing what happens as a result it's really hard to put that into words. I don't know about you, but until you experience it yourself or see it or are a part of it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
No. And there's so much that lays underneath that. And if the one way that I like to really think about that is there's like our foundational needs that we have as humans, what we need to literally to survive. So we need to eat. We can go a long time without eating and be fine. We need to breathe. Or we need to drink. We need to drink water. We can go days without drinking water. We'll be okay. We need to breathe. We can only go minutes. Best breath workers in the world can go 10 minutes without breath.
Yeah.
And how long can we go without thinking? A couple seconds, 10 seconds, maybe, if we put in a lot of work at it. So when we start to look at it like that, in that foundational, what we legitimately need, quite often that the words, the thinking, because that's how we understand our thoughts through language, and the breath go totally ignored. And when we start to control those two things, I've noticed that shift happen the fastest for people.
So for people who are listening and they're like, well, how the heck would I start doing that? Do you have one, like a recommendation where someone may start, just something kind of simple that might help somebody listening?
Yeah. I got a challenge for everybody that's listening. We'll call it you got a pen on you? Piece of paper?
Me or them?
Yeah. You.
I do. Oh, yeah.
You need it.
I have a pen and paper. Yeah. Okay.
So everybody else can get a pen and paper. We're going to do something called the Soft Talk Challenge. This is a huge one in my experience, in that something that, especially when we think about anxiety and how our thoughts can take over. Soft talk breeds anxiety. It just builds it. So when I say soft talk, think about you and I connecting for a podcast. Hey, Kyle, maybe on sometime in the next couple of months, we could hopefully do a podcast together, whether that's, I guess, sometime in the morning, if that might work for you. I don't know. I think that would work. Like that conversation there is just a mess.
Yeah.
And we can say things like, hopefully I'll get to be able to do this today. I think I'd like to get healthier. And when we can eliminate these soft talk words, then we can really start to own our mindset quicker. And we can notice that shift happen right away. So what I want you to do on this piece of paper, you're going to write a whole list of words that I'll read out to you. And I want you to write them in like 3 to 4 times bigger than you would normally write them. And we'll talk about why this is afterwards. So the list is probably, sort of, perhaps, kind of, feels like, I guess, hopefully, maybe, try, could, one day, might, should, and possibly. If you didn't write them down, I'll run through them one more time. Pause it, grab a piece of paper, pencil, pen, and write this down 3 times bigger than you normally would. Probably, sort of, perhaps, kind of, feels like, I guess, hopefully, maybe, try, could, one day, might, should, and possibly. So pretty self-explanatory, right? We put those words on there because those are the weak words that we use in our language. The language that doesn't get us anywhere. How easy would it be to have a conversation with somebody if you said, let's have a meeting tomorrow at 10:30 versus, hey, Wendy, do you think maybe we could have a meeting sometime in the morning? Okay, so you go back and forth. And it doesn't really get anywhere, and we've wasted a bunch of time, a bunch of mental real estate. And we do that with ourselves when we say things like, I think I should get more sleep. Maybe I could try and do this. And we start to shift that into, I can do this. I will get more sleep by doing whatever. So there's a multitude of reasons. So all I want you to do is keep that list that you made. And what I recommend people do is take a picture of it on their phone and put it as the lock screen on their phone for a week and see what happens. Or put that picture or put that piece of paper, tape it up on your bathroom mirror for a week, see what happens. I guarantee you'll notice a shift of some kind. And the people around you will notice a shift as well. How often with our kids are we saying things like, your kid will ask if you can go to the park today. And they'll say, hopefully, maybe later. And put yourself in your kids' shoes for a second, what that's like, hearing that. You're doing the same thing to yourself into that helpless, anxiety-ridden state. So take the pictures of that, put it on either on your phone. That's the easiest one because we look at our phone all the time. So it reminds you of it. Or put it up on your bathroom mirror and take a look at it there. Now, the reason why we write it so big and we write it down is there's actually some scientific reasons why we do that, and that has to do with a thing in our brain called the reticular activating system. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's that thing that when you go to buy a new car, you're going to look at a Volkswagen Jetta, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you start seeing that car everywhere. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, I have, and then I realized that it's that confirmation bias. Like you see what's on your mind, what you're looking for.
Yeah, and you don't have to be consciously looking for it. That's the amazing thing. All of a sudden they start popping up all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing that we do with our words and our thoughts and the cop that only sees rats everywhere, the negative people everywhere that can't see the good things anymore because that's all they think about. They're not intentionally looking for these people. We've taught ourselves to pick these out, And it's really hard to escape from unless we're on top of it and we start to shift it. So by shifting it, by taking care of that, in this example here, anybody that wrote this down, later on today, you're going to say, hopefully, or I think I'd like to, and you're going to notice it. So that's firing up your RAS, your reticular activating system, into being able to pick up on these things and change, make you aware of it, instead of being aware on the shittier stuff. And there's a simple, to fire that up a little bit, there's really simple practices you can do where take a minute and just pick a topic. Your kids. What do you love most about your kids? And take a minute and just write down all those things that you do, that you love about them. And do that once a day. And you're going to start to pick up, instead of that annoying, whiny voice to get a piece of Halloween candy, you're going to pick up on the way she looks at you when you're looking in the rearview mirror or something like that. And that fires up that RAS. We need that. We need to take advantage of the tools that are in us already to be able to grow.
Yeah, I love that you shared that with us. Thank you so much. It's like first of all, you need that self-awareness. It's like you're self-coaching. You're telling yourself as you're going through your day, but it all starts with self-awareness. And so if nobody ever tells you to look for those things, how do you know? I mean, I know for me, I am so guilty. So I'm going to call myself out. I say I'm sorry all the time. Now, I don't say it nearly as much as I used to. I'm a recovering I'm sorry sayer. And you know what really helps is hearing my kids say it. I have 2 daughters. And I stop them in their tracks and I'm like, why are you sorry? If you need to apologize for something, absolutely. Because there are times when they do need to apologize. But if so I realized how often I say it and I'm like, why am I actually saying that? And where is that coming from? So just building on that whole idea of our language and how powerful that is such a great, I'm so glad you shared that.
And why would you say you're talking to a Canadian, the kings and queens of I'm sorry.
True.
But what does it mean if you're not actually sorry about something? Why are you saying it? And you'll notice that a lot if we're late for something, we'll say, and if especially if it was for a good reason, like something came up between, or you and I, for example, when we scheduled the redo of the original podcast, you had something really big come up at work, and there would be no reason to be, I'm sorry, I have to reschedule. And say, I have to reschedule. Thanks for your patience on this. We need to be cognizant of how we're using those words, and that
I'm sure I apologized though, didn't I?
Yeah. But that's kind of the ingrained generosity side of why we say it, right? We try to be soft in the language all the time, and a lot of that comes down or reminds me of. I have no idea who said this, but your yes means nothing until you learn to say no. And how often do we just say yes to whatever, even if we don't have any intention of doing it? We just say yes and yes and yes and yes, and it just starts to pile up. We lose the ability to say no to stuff, and that happens a lot to first responders when we're used to taking every call. We're used to constantly being the one that goes to something to help, and then we go home and we think about the same thing, and we forget our ability to say no to things. It can be a very slippery slope.
Yeah, it can be hard. I mean, even, as far as I think I've come, I still have so much more to go. And I heard something not that long ago that's been beneficial to me, is that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So kind of along those lines of just recognize the hard, and maybe it's awkward, but if you can't do something, don't say yes. Yeah. I mean, it sounds simple, but really that's taken me a really long time to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not how we grow up. Right? It's actually making a significant shift in our language and in the way that we interact.
Yeah. And so this soft talk challenge is, I'm assuming, is this something that you cover with the people in your group?
Oh yeah, everybody does it.
Yeah. From day one? Is that
Everybody
like
if I can find somebody to talk to for a couple minutes, I'm going to get you.
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think you just had a lot of you just taught something to a lot of people, whoever's listening. So
Yeah, and hit me up with you personally in a week when you've taken a look at this and started to pick up on some things. I want to hear about it. So.
okay. And so now for me, like, I have not ever heard it explained this way, but I have become a lot more aware just over the last couple of years of the way I talk to myself and the language that I use. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly what you suggested, because I do write things on my bathroom mirror all the time. And so I think I'll write all of these words, and I'm not going to just do it for myself. I'm going to do it in my kids' bathroom too. And I'm gonna tell them to pay attention to it too, and my husband. But my husband and I share the same bathroom, so.
Now, the only thing that you'll get stuck on now, well, you won't get stuck on it, but it'll be a challenge, is that your kids will start calling you out on it.
Good. I love when they do that. They do that all the time now.
Yeah. That's the best. My oldest did that to me the other day. She said, "Well, it sounds like soft talk, Dad."
Oh, I love it. See, that's the way it's supposed to be, though. I like it when my kids call me out, because that shows me that they're actually listening and paying attention.
Yeah. And to touch on, you spoke on the language in your head, and that's a really big one that we quite often we think about it in that really dark, gloomy aspect of like the picture of the person with their hands in their face and just devastated. Yeah, the language that person is using to talk about themselves and to talk about other things is most likely quite awful. And we all have that story in our heads. I do a practice with people in the program where we talk about our quote unquote our Billy story. So everybody has this voice in their heads. I name, no offense to any Todds out there, but I name mine Todd because it just that's the voice that it sounds like.
Mine is Jane, and I'll share that story with you when you're done.
Yeah. And that's the voice that says, like, you're not good enough for this. What are you doing? You can't help anybody. Yeah. Or why are you so out of shape? Or why can't you fix your marriage? All these like really negative, horrible things. And once we start to focus on the language and we realize that those are words that we're telling ourselves, we can begin to shift that. And when you realize that it's just words, you can start to actually, as hard as it may be to imagine right now, you can start to laugh at that and be like, well, it's just some guy spitting words in my ear that doesn't have any actual weight on anything. And it might seem overwhelming and it might seem like it's all encompassing at the time. But once you start to shift that language, and you'll be amazed at how quickly that asshole version of Todd becomes your biggest fan and can start to lift you through things instead of pulling you back away from them.
That's really important. And again, something that I wish I would have known many, many years ago. Okay, so let me tell you my story, because the way that this first came about for me was just learning about my inner critic, which is similar along the same lines as what you're talking about. And so I was this dates back from when I was still working on homicide before I retired. And I have a good friend and former partner, who we were up all night, and you can probably, most first responders can relate to just like being punch drunk, not, obviously we know how unhealthy this is, but just being up for a really long extended period of time and not firing on all cylinders. And so we were going through, and this is another unhealthy thing I'll call myself out on, is that we were going through the McDonald's drive-through because we were looking for sustenance after being up all night, getting called in. And I was saying something to the clerk, and he was saying something back. It had to do with payment, and the credit card machine wasn't working. And I just was not understanding that they were saying, it's broken, pull up, and you need to give me the money when you get up here. And this was like back and forth, right? 5 or 6 times. And so my partner said, Jane, you know the Saturday Night Live skit with Chevy Chase and okay. And he said that line, Jane, you ignorant slut. And I started cracking up because he was like, you're just not getting it. And so for whatever reason, that stuck with me. And then when I started to really do this work, I'm like, Jane is my voice. So there you go. That's my story.
That hits home because Jane's my oldest too. So I'd be able to Jane like that. I haven't called her the same name, but
oh boy. Well, and again, I love Saturday Night Live. So just kind of circling back to what you said in the very beginning. We'll have to, maybe we'll put links to both of those in the show notes just for fun.
Absolutely.
So oh, go ahead.
Just to touch on the language side again, is your version there is a good story. It's a fun story. And we not only do we have the voice in our head that hopefully, if we've done some work on ourselves, is become positive and uplifting, but we also have the stories from all of the shit that we've seen and all those calls that we've gone to, or all of those frustrating events, the conversations we've had with management, or whatever it could be. And those stories are also some of the things that are holding us back from hitting that potential. And however you want to talk about it, there's all the examples out there, like the backpack of stuff that you carry around or whatever it might be. I like to think of a lot of those as the stories that we're carrying around. So if that's the call that you went to that was horrific, that was right at the start of your career, and you're through it, it hasn't affected you, but you still think about that call once a week, once every couple weeks, once a day, maybe. That's holding us back. And we use a technique in the coaching group. We don't do this as a group. We do it individually because it can be quite intense. But we work through those stories, and those stories, whether they're big or small, they'll either haunt us, annoy us, or hurt us, or in the right order: annoy, hurt, and haunt. Unfortunately, as first responders, quite often we have a lot of those haunting stories. So they don't have to hold the same charge as they unfortunately do quite often. Where I can think of one example in my career, a call I went to on the ambulance was really horrific with a young baby. Didn't make it. Tried everything to get this baby to survive, but it didn't happen. And that one stuck with me for quite a while. And it would be like a once a week thing where it would come up, and being taken through this technique that I now lead people through led from that story legitimately affecting me, where it would actually like shift my engagement with family or whoever I was working with, when it would come into my head totally on its own, into being something that doesn't actually hold any weight to it anymore. It can show up and it's just like, oh yeah, that happened. But the actual effect of it is no longer there. And we do that by writing the story out, using our words to write the story out. And then we read it and we separate it up with some breath, and we give some space and clarity to that actual story. And the results from that with the men and women that I've led through have been amazing. Very similar to like an EMDR type of response, except it's something that we can, once you get the ball rolling, work through a lot of stories in a short amount of time.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you're using journaling and storytelling as part of that process to go through. And that's something like, as we wrap up, I want to make sure that people that are listening understand, because it's something that I'm very mindful of also, since you and I do some of the similar work, is really understanding that there are a lot of different ways that people can be supported. Coaching is something that may not be as familiar to first responders. And then the difference between coaching and therapy, because these are two things that I think oftentimes people get confused, perhaps. And I know that I think it's important, especially for me, because I'm not a therapist. I know you're not a therapist. And for people to understand the distinction and to know what might be right for you, and what's appropriate and what's needed. And I don't know if you want to speak to that or if that's something that you've ever gotten questions on.
Oh yeah. And that's I don't think I brought it up when I talked about just getting into this work, and I tried tried meditating and journaling. I also tried going to therapy, and it just didn't land for me. Quite often, it was easy for me to navigate or to control the conversation into just being something that was, I never had to get into the stuff that was really there. And that's an issue that we face as first responders. We're very good at that. Bring that magician archetype back in and being able to control situations. And quite often we'll find when it comes to therapy, and this isn't for across the board, but quite often what gets brought up, we get all this stuff brought up if it gets there, but then no tools and no ability to actually work through it. And it's just, we become dependent on going to that session in an attempt to work through it, but you can't schedule your wellness or your recovery. And if we think that we can go to an appointment once every couple months to make ourselves better, it's just doesn't work like that. You can't save up all of this stress and then dump it for an hour and then pick it back up again and then come back in 90 days or however long. And it just doesn't land. So when it comes to like the coaching versus therapy side, coaching is very dependent, or not dependent, there's a lot of skill being taught, a lot of skills, a lot of techniques on how to deal with stuff. And sometimes a lot of those techniques will just heal whatever that stuff was. And you don't need to go to do that therapy appointment. And you'll find that quite often those skills that you're now learning can make it, you can go to that therapy appointment and talk about how good shit is versus how bad shit is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I like to think of it as, because, first of all, to speak to what you said about therapists and how we're really good at bullshitting as first responders, that's why it's so important. I talk about this a lot on this show, of having culturally competent clinicians, therapists, absolutely. Because that I think that can really go a long way in kind of fighting through some of that. But also the value in finding what's right for you, because some people absolutely need to go to therapy, and some people maybe that doesn't land, like you said. I've been to therapy, it's been helpful, and sometimes it hasn't. And I have also found a lot of value personally in coaching and being coached myself, which is what inspired me, probably just like you, to do this work in the way that I want to do it, based off of what I've learned and my experience. And I see it as, if people are kind of trying to figure out, well, what is this whole coaching thing? I think of it, I mean, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a subject matter expert in what therapists do, but it's more of a coactive, collaborative process with people, and giving them tools that they need, asking questions, helping them kind of figure out some things for themselves. I mean, but with that being said, a therapist can be a coach, but a coach can't be a therapist. I guess if that makes sense.
Yeah. And there's a way to look at that, where I like to think of the coaching side of things as being heavy on the proactive side, and the therapy side being, okay, we've let shit pile up to a unmanageable amount. We have to start working on taking stuff off that pile. That more reactive approach, where we've already got.
They need to definitely dig in and then deal with, now what do we do? But I guess it really just depends on who the therapist is and what their style is and what they do. But I think there's such a place for all of these things, and that's why I wanted to bring that up to and if people have questions, they can always get a hold of you or me. But understanding the distinction, and also being able to recognize what's right for you.
Yeah, and do them both.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Exactly. The more, the better, right?
And if it's the same thing goes for if somebody jumps into one of my programs, we work together, and you don't drive with me, that doesn't mean that the next coach that you resonate with, you're not gonna jive with. Same thing with therapists. Unfortunately, there's a lot out there that it's easy for, like, and Our RCMP, for example, is fantastic. You can dial a number and you can get access to a therapy appointment for no charge. You just call it up and you'll get one as soon as possible. But if somebody calls that number and they have an appointment with somebody and it fails, unfortunately, a lot of times that ends in being, okay, that's not for me, I'm done. Keep at it. We're really good at, as first responders, putting those blinders up. I like to compare this to, you just worked a 7 to 7 night shift and you're driving back to the detachment and you see that guy fly by. The odds of you throwing the lights on to go and get that guy, pretty slim. You're probably going to let that one go because you've got the blinders up. We're doing that with our health and with our wellness too, where we know that we're struggling at home, or we know that we're losing connection with our kids, we're getting snappy with our kids, but we choose to just keep those blinders up, whether that's by investing more into work or investing into some other unhealthy coping mechanisms like booze or food or phones, whatever it is, that we just choose to keep the blinders up and ignore that blatantly obvious thing that we need to deal with. And therapy or coaching ideally breaks those blinders down and gets us working on it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to kind of to wrap it up. And I could talk to you for hours. In fact, we're probably going to continue to talk after we end this podcast recording, which is going to be fun. But for those that are listening that want to find you, that want to learn more about your program, and I know you also have, sometimes you do some free things, I've noticed, like you put out some free content. So can you just tell everybody how to find you?
Yeah, I have a website, kylestubbs.ca. That's where you'll find all the information for courses or coaching, workshops, anything like that. And a little blog on there. I enjoy that a heck of a lot more than the Instagram, Facebook side of things. I have a definite love-hate relationship with those platforms. But you can find me on Instagram or Facebook as well. It's just my name, Kyle Stubbs. And I do once every month, once every 2 months, we'll do a workshop just on, could be on anything, could be some of this language stuff, could be breathing. The last one we did was called the demystifying mindfulness. So taking that, whoa, what the hell is this? I don't like that word. And stripping that down and working on an intro to meditation, so to speak, or some mindfulness practices. So things like that, those are completely free to jump on. I just put the link out there. You just have to go to the website and sign up for them when they pop up. And yeah, happy to chat with anybody. Anybody wants to have a conversation about anything that they're struggling with, or that what I'd rather hear is what you're succeeding at, what's really working for you. Hit me up on there. I'd love to have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And I appreciate you coming on again.
Number 1.5.
So for anybody out there, check Kyle out, check his program out, especially the guys that are listening. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Thanks again, Kyle.
Thank you.
I'm just stuck here.